Mom, starting the next day. Those are your new obligations in this house. Words echoed in my head as I examined the paper she had simply passed me. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a request. It was an order. My own daughter in my own domestic became giving me a work agenda, as though I were a newly hired domestic worker. In case you don't agree, she persevered, her voice cold, a tone she'd perfected over the past few months. You could present your things and leave. This house desires someone who surely helps, not someone who just takes up space. My fingers trembled as I read the listing. 6 a.m. Wake up and put together breakfasts. 7. Get the youngsters dressed and take them to. 8. Return the general residence cleansing. 9. Wash and hold the laundry. 10. Put together lunch. The list continued hour by means of hour till 11 at night whilst, according to this file, I have to be ironing garments for tomorrow. And obviously, delivered from the sofa without even searching up from his. All this consists of purchasing. The house charges. That's what your pension is for. No. I stood there within the middle of my very own dwelling room, the identical living room in which I had welcomed whilst she turned into born 34 years ago, wherein I had celebrated her birthdays, in which I had comforted her whilst she cried over her first heartbreaks. Now that equal infant checked out me with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. You don't have a good deal time to decide, mother, she stated, portray her nails a bright pink. Has already spoken with a legal professional. Due to the fact we've been residing right here for over 2 years and preserving the residence, we've got rights. So you may be our worker and stay, or you can leave and we'll live anyway. The chance was clear. In my very own house, with the deed in my call, my daughter become blackmailing me. Both I have become her private servant, paying all prices and operating tirelessly, or I would be kicked out so they may take everything. Suppose it over, endured, blowing on her freshly painted nails. At your age, in which else are you going? To locate an area to live on a $600 pension. As a minimum right here you have got a roof and food, and you may see your grandkids normal, except of root, you favor to live alone in a few miserable little room. Let out a merciless laugh. Besides, honey, let's be practical. What else are you going to do along with your lifestyles? As a minimum, this way you may experience beneficial. It is better than watching all day like antique women your age do. My were at the ground playing with their drugs, completely oblivious to the verbal exchange that changed into shattering my global. 8-year-old seemed up at me for a moment and requested, Grandma, are you going to make snacks? I am hungry. It was the normality. To them, I was already the housekeeper, the person who fixes things, cleans, chefs, serves. No longer the grandma who cherished them. Now not the woman who had worked 40 years to buy this residence. I used to be just the free servant who became usually available. Look, mother. Stood up and walked closer to me, setting a condescending hand on my shoulder. It is not that we don't love you. We like you very an awful lot. It is why we are providing you with the opportunity to live. But things ought to exchange. This house needs order, and a person has to be liable for preserving the whole thing going for walks. And why does that a person have to be me? I controlled to whisper, finding my voice for the first time in this nightmarish communication. Due to the fact you are the only who doesn't work, answered without searching up. We work, we take a look at, we've actual obligations. You just collect your pension and don't do something productive. I felt as though I had been slapped. 40 years running as a secretary in a central authority workplace. 40 years getting up at 5 in the morning, taking buses to get to paintings, saving each penny to buy this house. 40 years elevating by myself after her father deserted us when she became simply 3 years antique. Don't do something productive, I repeated, feeling the phrases choke me. A majority of these years preserving this house, paying the payments, shopping for your meals, taking care of your kids at the same time as you go out, washing your clothes, cleansing up your messes. It's not work, mother. Interrupted me with that condescending smile I had learned to hate. That is what every person living in a residence does. The distinction is that now it's going to be prepared with fixed schedules so the whole thing runs smoother. I appeared around my living room. The furnishings I had bought with so much sacrifice turned into ruined. The leather-based couch, which had taken me years to pay off, had meal stains and tears from whilst the kids jumped on it without everybody correcting them. The timber espresso table, which have been my pleasure, was protected in marks from glasses and hot plates that no one stricken to put on coasters. On the partitions, my own family pictures were replaced via movie posters liked. My e-book collection had been relegated to a container within the garage to make area for the video games and digital gadgets they constantly offered with the money I gave them. Except continued inspecting her nails with satisfaction. That is going to be suitable for you. It is going to offer you cause. These days you've got seemed very depressed, very bored. Having clear responsibilities will assist you experience higher about yourself. The manipulation was so glaring. It bodily harmed. She was promoting me my very own slavery as though it had been a want they were doing me, as though becoming their free servant became a shape of remedy for my emotional properly being. And you need to paintings on weekends too, brought, subsequently searching up from his. Saturdays are for deep house cleansing and Sundays are for making ready the week's meals. It's not that we are being merciless to you, honey. It is simply that we need things to run like a real domestic. Like a real home, I repeated, feeling anger start to replace the shock. This isn't always a real domestic. That is the residence I purchased that I maintained wherein I welcomed you whilst you had nowhere to stay. Sure, however, now we're a own family, spoke back with that twisted good judgment that left me speechless. And in a family, everyone has their role. Ours is to paintings and earn profits. Yours is to preserve the house walking. It's honest. My 12 months antique granddaughter approached and tugged at my skirt. Grandma, can I have cookies? The ones on top of the fridge. I looked at her and saw in her eyes the equal expectation I had seen in her mother's eyes when she changed into her age. The expectancy that grandma continually says yes, continually fixes matters usually available. However, now that expectation got here with an reliable schedule, an unsigned agreement, an implicit threat. In a second, my love, I advised her, caressing her head. No, interrupted sharply. Your grandma is going to comply with a new timetable. In case you want something, you have to ask her on the right time. It is 4:00 within the afternoon now, and consistent with the agenda, this is her snack prep time besides. I walked to the kitchen with trembling legs, feeling as if each step led me deeper into an abyss from which I failed to if I should break out. The timetable remained in my hand, crumpled through the stress of my hands. It became like preserving my personal emotional demise sentence. When I opened the pantry, I realized how empty it become. 3 damaged cookies at the lowest of a package, an expired can of tuna, and half a bag of rice. Inside the fridge, the situation wasn't an awful lot better. 2 yogurts had sold for herself, one of beers, and the leftovers from 3-day antique dinner that no one else had desired to eat. Grandma, there are not any cookies. Shouted from the dwelling room with that impatience she had discovered from her mother. I'm coming, my love, I spoke back, knowing flawlessly well that I'd ought to improvise with what little there was, or alternatively with what little that they had left me to have in my own kitchen. I heard footsteps drawing near. Her heels echoed with an expert they hadn't had in this residence before. It became as though the easy act of having exceeded me that paper had transformed her into the reliable proprietor of everything. Mom, even as you are within the kitchen, I desired to remind you which you want to visit the supermarket early tomorrow. I made a listing of the entirety we need, she stated, sticking a paper at the refrigerator door. It's approximately $150 worth of groceries. Oh, and also you additionally want to stop by using the pharmacy to pick up the children nutrients and unique shampoo. $150, a quarter of my monthly pension for per week's worth of groceries for a own family that had determined my cash become theirs by way of proper. My pension doesn't stretch that. Some distance every week, I managed to say, although my voice sounded surprisingly small in my very own kitchen. Oh, mother, always the same, she sighed dramatically. You understand, is saving to shop for us our very own residence. We can't be spending our profits on food and basic necessities. Besides, you consume right here regular. It's regular with a view to make a contribution to the prices. The good judgment changed into so twisted it made me dizzy. Turned into saving for his personal house while living rent-free in mine. He ate my food and used my services. And that I, the real proprietor of the property, needed to pay for the privilege of being their unfastened home employee. And what if I do not have sufficient cash? I requested, even though I already knew what her answer might be. Then you must alter and purchase the fundamentals first. The youngsters need to devour nicely. Mother, you cannot be egocentric with cash while there are infants inside the residence. Selfish with my very own money in my own house. The phrase stabbed me like a dagger inside the chest. Seemed at the kitchen entrance, stretching as though he had just woken from a sleep. It changed into 4:30 within the afternoon on a Tuesday, and he became in his pajamas watching television at the same time as I took care of the whole lot else. Honey, could you put together something true for dinner? It changed into a difficult day at paintings nowadays, he stated, establishing the fridge and pulling out a beer as if it were the maximum natural thing in the international. A tough day. I could not assist but ask. I thought you hadn't left all morning. I work from home on Tuesdays, he answered with a tone that made it clear I had no proper to impeach his timetable. Digital meetings, important calls. It is very disturbing. This is why I need to relax when I'm finished. I looked at the clock. 4:30 inside the afternoon. If he had labored from home, his workday had lasted precisely 3 hours. Thinking about I had visible him dozing on the sofa at 1:00 within the afternoon. Besides, he persisted, taking a long swig of his beer. And I had been talking about some extra regulations to make the house run smoother. For instance, we need you to admire our downtime. Whilst we are within the dwelling room watching, it'd be higher in case you failed to interrupt with cleaning or cooking noises. But the agenda says I need to cook at the moment, I spoke back, keeping up the paper nevertheless in my hand. Yes, however, without making noise, or you can prepare dinner earlier when we're no longer resting. It's a rely of better enterprise. The contradiction become absurd. I had to cook at fixed times, however, without annoying their relaxation periods, which reputedly blanketed most of the day. I had to comply with strict regulations that modified at their comfort. Returned to the kitchen with a grin that failed to reach her eyes. It became that smile she had perfected since early life, the only she used while she desired something or while she changed into approximately to mention something specifically hurtful, disguised as challenge. Mom, I additionally wanted to talk to you about your room, she stated, leaning towards the counter as if she owned the region. And that, I suppose, it would be higher in case you moved to the small room in the returned. We need the main bedroom as it's bigger, and we've got greater matters. The master bedroom. My main bedroom. The room wherein I had slept for 30 years. Where I had cried after my husband's dying. In which I had dreamed of looking my develop up in a loving surroundings. Now they desired to relegate me to the tiny carrier room, literally. That room is very small, I stated, feeling my voice crack. There may be barely sufficient room for a dual bed. It is ideal for you, mother. You don't need a good deal area anyway. In that way, we will have a larger closet for our garments and the children's stuff. It is extra sensible for each person. Greater realistic for each person. That was the chant that justified each humiliation, every lack of dignity, each step closer to my conversion into a shadow in my own lifestyles. Besides, the small room is closer to the kitchen. It will be easier for you to get up early to put together breakfast without stressful everyone. Of course, my new vicinity within the residence had been calculated to maximize my usefulness as a home employee, close to the kitchen to serve higher, some distance from the principal residing regions, in order now not to trouble the true population of the residence. And when do I must flow? I asked, though I already knew I had no real desire. This weekend could be perfect, answered cheerfully, as if we have been planning a holiday. Can help you pass the heavy matters properly, the few stuff you want to take. Most of the furniture in the master suite we are going to use ourselves. The furniture I had sold, the solid timber wardrobe which have been my first purchase once I got my first process. The vanity with a replicate in which I had gotten geared up for my wedding. The marital bed in which I had conceived. All of that might now be theirs because it was extra realistic. Ran into the kitchen along with his tablet in his hands and an urgent expression. Grandma, my battery died and that I need the charger. Where is it? In my room, honey. Go get it, I said routinely. No, intervened firmly. You cannot pass into your grandma's room without permission. She'll deliver you the charger when she finishes getting ready snack. The humiliation become whole. Now, not even my grandson may want to freely input my room. But and could determine when and the way I ought to circulate, what fixtures I may want to maintain, and which room I was allowed to live in. In one extra factor, mother continued, as if it had been an endless listing of latest regulations. Sundays are our circle of relatives' day. And I need to spend exceptional time with the youngsters, so it might be higher if you plan to exit on those days. You may visit the park, visit a pal, anything you need. We just want space to be our own family. Sunday's my own family day too. The day I had reserved for years to do unique activities with to cook dinner together, to watch movies, cuddled on the sofa. Now it became the day I became an intruder in my personal home. And in which I imagined to go every Sunday. I requested, feeling tears nicely up in my eyes. I do not know, Mom. You virtually have pals. You can move for a walk, visit church. There are numerous things a person your age can do. The important component is that you have your personal sports, that you do not rely so much on us for enjoyment. That nighttime I could not sleep. I lay in bed observing the ceiling that would quickly not be mine, considering how I had reached this point. At what moment had I stopped being the mother and end up the servant? While had I lost the proper to have an opinion in my very own domestic? I remembered while arrived with and the children. Years ago, they had misplaced their condominium because had misplaced his preceding process. They arrived with tears in their eyes, hugging me and promising it might be for a few months whilst they recovered financially. You're our salvation, mother, had informed me that first night time. I do not know what we'd do without you. You're the exceptional mom in the world. The primary few weeks had been almost nice. It became excellent to have the residence full of lifestyles once more, to pay attention the children's laughter walking via the hallways that have been silent given that my husband died. Helped me with the cooking. Helped with a few minor maintenance, and the infants stuffed my heart with their spontaneous hugs. However, progressively, so slowly that I failed to it till it became too late, things started to exchange. First, it became asking me to look at the children even as she went activity looking. Then it turned into anticipating me to put together dinner due to the fact he became too worn out from his job interviews. Later on, it have become herbal for me to pay for groceries because after all of us devour right here. Every prefer I did became an expectation. Each gesture of love converted into a duty. On every occasion I said no problem to a request, I was signing my very own emotional servitude. At 3:00 in the morning, I heard noises within the kitchen. I quietly got up and walked down the hallway, locating serving himself cereal directly from the box, leaving crumbs all over the countertop that I had wiped clean before going to bed. Is the entirety K? I whispered in order now not to wake the children. He checked out me startled, as though he were caught doing something incorrect. Sure, I used to be just hungry. It's nothing. But tomorrow there might be cereal within the bowl for the children, I said, when you consider that the container was nearly empty. Oh honey, do not be dramatic. It is simply cereal. You could purchase extra tomorrow, he answered, leaving the empty field on the countertop and heading back to his room. My room. I stood there inside the darkish, cleaning up the crumbs he had left, knowing that this became my life now, cleaning up their messes in silence at 3:00 in the morning at the same time as he slept in my bed without the slightest subject for the consequences of his moves. On Friday morning, as I prepared breakfast in step with my new official schedule, came downstairs with an power I hadn't visible in months. She became sporting a red dress I didn't understand and footwear that priced more than my week's worth of groceries. Mom, I want you to observe the children all weekend, she introduced as she poured coffee into my preferred mug, the one with little painted plants that my husband had given me on our 5th anniversary. And I are happening a pairs retreat at the downtown motel. We want to reconnect in any case this pressure. A pairs retreat, I repeated, unable to hide my marvel. And with what cash? Oh, mother, usually thinking about cash, she spoke back with that synthetic chuckle she had perfected. Got an advantage at paintings. We deserve a ruin after everything we've been through. A bonus. Who worked 3 hours a day from home had acquired a bonus. But by some means that cash wasn't sufficient to buy cereal or make a contribution to household prices. It was best enough for luxury lodges and romantic retreats. And the children might be okay with me all weekend, I asked, though I already knew. My opinion failed to count number of direction they'll. You are their grandma. It is herbal for you to take care of them. Except in keeping with your new timetable, weekends are unique for sports with them, she stated, checking her as she spoke. It became true. In my servitude timetable, weekends have been marked as in-depth infant care and deep residence cleaning time. Seemingly, my relaxation failed to exist of their idea of own family corporation. We need to talk, I stated, feeling something spoil inside me. This pass on. She looked up from her with an expression of authentic surprise, as though she couldn't understand why I was protesting against my manifestly reasonable fate. Speak approximately what, Mom? Your negative mindset currently. Because yes, I have observed you're very grumpy. Maybe you should see a medical doctor at your age. It's every day to have hormonal modifications that have an effect on your temper. Hormonal adjustments. My indignation at the abuse became a medical trouble I had to resolve. My resistance to humiliation turned into a symptom of my advanced age that required professional treatment. I am now not sick. I am bored with being dealt with like an employee in my personal domestic, I stated, sudden myself with my own readability. Worker. She repeated, placing on an indignant expression that could have received an Oscar. Mother, how are you going to say that? Your family. What happens is that during a circle of relatives, anyone has duties. Ours are to work and generate earnings. Yours is to hold the house strolling. It's that simple. And why do my duties consist of paying all the expenses and running 24 hours a day? I asked, feeling my voice tremble however develop more potent. Mother, no person asked you to work 24 hours. The timetable we gave you may be very affordable. You've got free time between sports. You can rest, watch, do whatever you want in your unfastened time. I checked out the timetable taped to the refrigerator. The unfastened time, it stated, had been 30 intervals between obligations. Sufficient to visit the toilet or get a tumbler of water, however. No longer enough to surely rest. And the money, why do I ought to pay for the whole thing when you have income? I insisted. Because we're saving for our future, mother. We can't be spending our money on modern-day costs while we've got long-time period dreams. You've got already lived your existence. You've had your opportunity to keep and plan. Now it is our flip. The good judgment become devastating in its cruelty. In keeping with their reasoning, I had already had my hazard to live, and now my role became to finance and facilitate their possibilities. My pension earned with 40 years of labor changed into less essential than their lengthy time period dreams. Regarded within the kitchen, already dressed to depart, with a smile that I discovered increasingly repulsive. He approached and kissed her at the cheek, a gesture of possession and complicity that absolutely excluded me. All set for the weekend? He asked her, completely ignoring me, though I was standing much less than 3 toes away. Yes, my love. I've explained everything to Mom. She'll cope with the youngsters and the house, spoke back as if I were simply any other item she had organized for his or her absence. Perfect, honey. Just one more component, stated sooner or later, addressing me. On Monday, my mom is coming to visit us for a few days. She'll want the visitor room, so it might be desirable when you have it spotless. She additionally likes breakfast very early, round 6:00 within the morning. I am hoping it's not a problem. His mother. Some other man or woman I might have to attend to, feed and serve. In my own domestic. Some other mouth to feed with my cash. Some other character who might anticipate my services as though it have been the maximum natural thing inside the world. And how long is she staying? I requested, though I already sensed I wouldn't like the solution. We do not know precisely. It relies upon on how she feels. Currently, she's been very lonely when you consider that my father died, so we idea being with family would do her desirable, he replied. As though my house have been a loose lodge for humans in want of business enterprise. Your mother in that eyes don't get alongside very well, I said, remembering the few instances I had met her and her dismissive mindset toward me. Oh honey, those are beyond problems. You have to learn to forgive and overlook. Except she's an aged female. She needs care and interest. I'm sure that whilst you get to know her better, you'll get along thoroughly. Care and attention that, of course, I'd provide without remuneration or reputation, while and loved their romantic retreat. I'd be serving breakfast at 6:00 inside the morning to a woman who considered me inferior. And mother introduced, placing on the jewelry that completed her outfit. While your mom in regulation arrives, it'd be true in case you deliver her the master bedroom. We will sleep in the kids' room for some days. She wishes to be comfy. The master bedroom, which they'd already taken from me, now they had been going to give it to smother. I, in my own residence, could occupy the smallest room while an entire stranger slept in my bed, used my furniture, and expected my services. The weekend became a nightmare that exceeded all my darkest expectations. And left on Friday at 2:00 within the afternoon, after leaving me an additional list of instructions for baby care that included specific times for meals, academic sports, confined screen time, and strict sleep exercises. It is crucial which you hold subject, mother had told me before getting into the taxi I had paid for to the downtown motel. Youngsters want structure. If you destroy them this weekend, it will likely be very hard for them to admire us again afterwards. And checked out me with expectation, waiting for me to fulfill the function of entertainer, prepare dinner, teacher, and babysitter all at the identical time. It wasn't their fault, of course. They had been children adapting to a gadget in which Grandma changed into the individual that solved the entirety, at the same time as their parents loved freedoms I had forgotten existed. On Saturday morning, as I organized pancakes for breakfast in keeping with the specific nutritional instructions had left, spilled orange juice on the dwelling room rug. It became a normal coincidence, the form of aspect that happens while there are kids at home. But once I started out cleansing, I realized there weren't enough cleansing products. Mother says that when something gets stained, you need to smooth it right away or it gets ruined all the time. Knowledgeable me with the seriousness of an expert supervisor. She was proper. Have been very precise about preserving the house spotless for the duration of their absence. So, at 9 within the morning on Saturday, I discovered myself on foot to the supermarket with the two kids, spending $30 of my pension on cleansing products for a catastrophe that might were solved with soap and water. On the grocery store, requested for the special cereal his father ate, the one that value $8 a field. Desired the organic cookies her mom offered her, those within the $10 bundle. I looked at the charges and made determined intellectual calculations, understanding that each greenback I spent changed into $1 much less for my personal needs. Why are you taking so long to determine, Grandma? Requested impatiently at the same time as I in comparison charges of laundry detergent. I am simply seeing which one is better, my love, I lied, now not wanting to give an explanation for to an 8-year-old that his grandma had to choose between buying meals for him or medicine for herself. Whilst we got domestic, there was a message from on my mom. I hope you acquire fresh veggies for the week. While we get returned on Sunday, we want the house to be perfect and the kitchen complete. We don't want to reach at an empty house after our enjoyable ride. Fresh veggies, another $50 I hadn't budgeted for, any other hours walking with the kids due to the fact the taxi cash would have to be used for meals, any other afternoon of my weekend dedicated to serving the needs of folks who had been enjoying a luxurious resort with the money they had saved way to my free services. On Sunday afternoon, as I wiped clean the residence from pinnacle to backside for its positive arrival, I acquired a call that might alternate everything. It became Lucy, my neighbor of 15 years, the most effective man or woman who absolutely knew my scenario, even though I had in no way brazenly spoken approximately it. Honey, you've seemed very atypical recently, she said with that heat voice that jogged my memory what it turned into like to have a conversation without timers or to-do lists. Sure, I am nice, I lied routinely as I folded clothes that I had washed and ironed over the weekend. No, you're no longer okay. I see you leaving very early each morning, as if you're rushing someplace. And that I see you coming home with supermarket baggage almost every day. What is going on in your private home? She insisted with that gentle persistence that characterized authentic buddies. For a moment, I used to be tempted to hold up. It was simpler to hold pretending that everything changed into normal, that it was herbal for a 66 vintage girl to stay like a housekeeper in her personal domestic. However, something in Lucy's voice broke me. Lucy, can you return over for a moment? I need to talk to someone, I stated, surprising myself with my personal honesty. I am on my manner, she replied without asking questions. When Lucy arrived, the kids had been watching inside the living room, completely absorbed of their shows. We sat within the kitchen, surrounded by way of the perfect order I had created for their mother and father arrival. And for the first time in months, I advised someone the reality approximately my lifestyles. I showed her the schedule. I defined about the money. I informed her approximately the chance of being kicked out of my own residence if I didn't agree to be their free employee. I told her about the small room, approximately the family exclusion Sundays, about mother, who might become served with the aid of me in my very own mattress. Lucy listened in silence with an expression that went from surprise to horror, and subsequently to the indignation I had visible in a long time. "Honey, that is abuse," she said subsequently with a clarity that hit me like a slap of reality. "This isn't always regular. This isn't always what a circle of relatives who loves you does. But they say it's fair that during a circle of relatives each person has their function." I commenced to repeat the words I had heard so oftentimes. "No," she interrupted with a firmness that amazed me. "In a functional family, roles are mentioned and jointly agreed upon. No person imposes an unpaid work agenda on every person. Nobody threatens to kick everybody out in their own home. It's not love, honey. It really is exploitation." The phrase hung in the air between us. Exploitation. It wasn't own family dysfunction. It wasn't a generational misunderstanding. It wasn't my incapacity to conform to modern instances. It was pure and simple exploitation. However, what am I able to do? I requested, feeling the tears subsequently find their way after months of being held returned. "They're right approximately one thing. At my age with my pension, in which else am I going to move? Who else goes to need me?" "Honey, observe me," Lucy stated, taking my hands in hers. "You are 66 years old, no longer 96. You own your home, have a solid pension, and as some distance as I know you've got. All your intellectual schools flawlessly clear. You do not need everyone to support you. They may be the ones who want you." It turned into such an easy and innovative perspective that it left me speechless. For so long, I had assumed that I was the fortunate one to have a place to live, that I had forgotten that the region changed into mine. I had assumed that I was the beneficiary in their generosity, when in fact they had been the beneficiaries of mine. "Except," Lucy persevered, "do you definitely suppose that is going to get higher over time? Do you watch someday they're going to wake up and determine to treat you with recognize? Honey, that is going to get worse. Every restrict you allow them to go turns into the brand new minimum widespread for a way they treat you." She changed into right. The schedule hadn't appeared in a single day. It had been the end result of 2 years of slow erosion of my dignity, of small concessions that had emerged as expectancies, of favors that had converted into obligations. "What might you do in my place?" I requested her, though I already knew the real query turned into whether I would have the braveness to do what I knew become proper. "I would kick them out of my residence the following day," she replied without hesitation. "And if you don't have the braveness to do that, but at least start setting boundaries, charging to your services, annoying admire in your private home, reminding them who in reality owns all of this." We heard the sound of an automobile arriving, and had again from their romantic retreat, tanned and comfy, equipped to renew the ordinary in which I was their personal employee, and that they had been my benevolent bosses. "Honey," Lucy informed me earlier than she left, "if you want to talk, in case you want assist, in case you need someone to remind you that you need to be handled with dignity, call me day or night. And think about this. If a domestic employee worked the hours you figure and paid for the privilege of running, how lengthy do you watched they might remaining in that task?" The question haunted me as and entered the residence, critically checking if I had met all their expectations during their absence. It haunted me as they complained that there has been no milk in the fridge and that I hadn't offered enough new towels for Mom's visit. That night time, lying in my bed, which might soon now not be mine, I started to ask myself for the first time in a long term what would take place if I virtually stated no. Monday morning arrived like an excellent typhoon of humiliations. At 5:30 in the morning, the doorbell woke me with its shrill sound. It was Mom, status at my door with great suitcases and the expression of a person anticipating to be acquired like a queen. Ultimately, she stated without even greeting me, pushing her suitcases within the residence. The taxi took for all time. I am hopping to find my unique breakfast wishes to you. I've a totally sensitive stomach and can't devour simply something. It become 5:45 in the morning. I hadn't even had time to comb my teeth or comb my hair, but there I was receiving instructions about the special gastronomic desires of a girl who had invited herself to my house indefinitely. Right morning, I managed to mention, even though my voice sounded from interrupted sleep. Instructed me you have been coming. However, sure, it's suitable that everything is settled, she interrupted me, looking around my house with a vital eye. Although I see that this area desires some changes. Wherein is my room? I am very tired from the experience. My room. The master bedroom that had already been taken from me and that might now be hers in the course of her indefinite life. I led her down the hallway sporting one among her suitcases that weighed as if it had rocks in her, while she commented on each element of my decor that she disliked. This rug may be very worn, she stated, pointing to the Persian rug that were my satisfaction for years. And these curtains are too dark. At my age, I need plenty of herbal mild. You may need to alternate them day after today. Change the curtains with my cash, of course, to make my personal room extra relaxed for an uninvited guest who had no departure date. Whilst we reached the master bedroom, inspected the whole thing like a popular reviewing troops. She opened and closed drawers. She evaluated the mattress with the aid of sitting on it with distinct tears of force and in the end declared, "This can do. Although I need you to scrub all of the sheets with hypoallergenic detergent. I cannot sleep in beds that are not spotless. Hypoallergenic detergent. Any other unplanned purchase. Every other cost that could come out of my already stretched pension." At 6:00 sharp, as had promised, appeared inside the kitchen watching for her unique breakfast. She changed into carrying a silk nightgown and feathered slippers, as if she had been the proprietor of a luxurious resort as opposed to a guest in my residence. I want scrambled eggs, however very dry, no oil, entire wheat toast but barely toasted, now not burnt, very light espresso, almost like tea, and fresh fruit, but the perfectly ripe ones. She recited her demands as though it had been a menu I need to have memorized. I had no eggs. I had no whole wheat bread. I had no fresh fruit due to the fact I had spent all my cash over the weekend on the kids' whims and cleansing merchandise to maintain the house perfect for its return. I don't have exactly what you're inquiring for, however I will prepare something similar. I started to give an explanation for. What do you suggest? You don't have any? She interrupted me with an indignation that stuffed the whole kitchen. Failed to tell you what I needed. This is unacceptable. A residence without the basic ingredients for a first-rate breakfast. At that second, regarded in the kitchen, already dressed for paintings, with that irritated expression he wore whilst something interfered with his flawlessly organized recurring. What is taking place here? Why so much noise so early? He requested, although it became his mom who had been shouting. Your housekeeper would not have food in the residence, spoke back, pointing at me as if I had been a faulty item. How am I going to have breakfast without the primary elements? Housekeeper. She hadn't even to fake that I used to be whatever extra than that. To her, I used to be really the provider personnel of her son's residence, employed to take care of her wishes without question. Honey, failed to you go to the grocery store this weekend? Requested me with that reproachful voice he had perfected to make me feel like a punished baby. Yes, I did. But I spent the cash on what asked for the kids. And that I started to provide an explanation for. Oh, please. He interrupted me. You constantly have excuses. My mom needs to have a proper breakfast. Visit the supermarket now and buy what's wished, and subsequent time plan better. Visit the supermarket at 7:00 within the morning. Spend more money. I failed to have to please a female who dealt with me like trash in my own house. All this even as prepared to visit his 3-hour-a-day job and persevered to sleep peacefully in the children's room. And with what money? I asked, feeling something harden inside. Me. I already spent the whole lot I had this weekend. Together with your pension cash, manifestly, responded as though it had been the query inside the international. That is what you've got income for, right? To preserve the residence running. My pension is already committed for this month, I stated with a firmness that amazed me. I have no extra money to be had for unplanned costs. The silence that accompanied turned into so dense it can be cut with a knife. Looked at me as though I had blasphemed and had the expression of someone who had simply witnessed the most incomprehensible insurrection in history. Are you telling me you cannot purchase food for my mom? Asked, raising his voice with an indignation that could have been comical if it hadn't been so merciless. I'm telling you, I don't have money to be had right now, I repeated, retaining my voice as calm as feasible. This is tremendous, exclaimed, addressing her son as though I were not gift. This is the type of service thy own family receives on this house. An employee who refuses to do primary buying. Honey, this can't move on, stated. Adopting a tone he could have used to scold a difficult worker. In case you cannot fulfill the fundamental responsibilities of preserving this house, then perhaps we want to rethink the dwelling arrangements. There has been the veiled, however clear risk again. Do you follow our needs? Or do you depart your very own residence? Do you serve our own family without limits? Or do you lose the proper to stay within the location you yourself offered and paid for? At that moment, seemed within the kitchen, nonetheless in her pajamas, but completely conscious way to the noise of the argument. Her presence at once modified the dynamic of the verbal exchange, as if she had been the manager arriving to solve a labor dispute. What's going on here? She asked, though it became obvious she had been listening from the hallway. Your mother is refusing to go to the supermarket to shop for breakfast for my mom. Defined to her as if he had been a child reporting any other toddler's terrible behavior. Mom, stated with that voice of sadness she had perfected on the grounds that formative years. Is it proper which you don't need to buy food for grandma? The manipulation changed into best. That they had converted my resistance to spending cash, I didn't have right into a merciless refusal to feed a needy elderly lady. They turned my try to set fundamental monetary barriers into an inexcusable act of selfishness. It's no longer that I don't want to, I defined, feeling myself protecting in opposition to accusations I shouldn't must refute. It is that I have already spent all my money for this month, and I haven't any budget left for added purchases. Oh, Mom, usually exaggerating about cash. Sighed dramatically. How lots can breakfast cost? $10, $15. Don't inform me you don't have $1 to feed your circle of relatives. $15 that could become 30 day after today, 45 the day after the next day. A consistent drain on my pension to maintain relaxed a lady who brazenly despised me. Besides, brought, my mother may not be here forever. It is best brief while she adjusts to being alone. Cannot you're making this small sacrifice for the own family? Brief. The same phrase they had used once they arrived 2 years in the past for a stay of some months. The equal empty promise that they had used to justify each new invasion of my area, each new call for on my time, each new hollow in my price range. And the way long is going to live? I asked, even though I already knew I would not like the solution. We don't know exactly, spoke back vaguely. It depends on how she feels, whether or not she unearths activities she likes inside the neighborhood, whether or not she adapts properly to the residents' ordinary. The house routine. My habitual of serving, cleaning, cooking, and purchasing the privilege of doing so. The ordinary wherein I used to be the free domestic worker for a family that had determined my house become theirs through right. At that second, as I stood in my own kitchen, being scolded for now not trying to spend my pension on the whims of a woman who dealt with me like trash, something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't a dramatic second of enlightenment. It become greater like while a dam breaks. First a small crack, then a constant go with the flow, and in the end an unstoppable avalanche of clarity. Okay, I stated with a peaceful that amazed even myself. I'll visit the grocery store and purchase what needs for her breakfast. All of us appeared to loosen up at once, as if my surrender had restored the herbal order of the universe, in which I obeyed without thinking. However, there was something exceptional in my voice. Something none of them detected due to the fact they were too used to assuming my submission. Ideal mom, stated with that condescending smile she reserved for once I came to my senses. I knew you'll apprehend ultimately how crucial it's far to make grandma sense welcome. I speedy dressed and left for the grocery store. But this time I did not go instantly to the meals phase. This time I first went to the drugstore in the shopping middle where I knew there has been an ATM, no longer to withdraw cash for breakfast, but for something completely unique. I $200 from my savings account. Cash I were saving for emergencies. However, I realized this was the biggest emergency of all. The emergency of convalescing my dignity earlier than it changed into two past due. With the cash in my wallet, I walked to an attorney's office I had seen advertised within the local newspaper. It was early, slightly 8:30 within the morning, but the receptionist knowledgeable me that lawyer David Miller handled emergency consultations from 900. Is it an emergency? The receptionist requested me, a young woman with a tight smile. Sure, I replied without hesitation. I suppose it is. David Miller turned out to be a man in his 50s with a smartly trimmed beard and eyes that conveyed the form of enjoy that comes from having visible all sorts of complicated own family conditions. Tell me what is taking place, Mrs. Everett. He commenced consulting the card wherein I had written my call. Mrs. Everett, I said, and for the first time in a long term, I suggested my name with something corresponding to pleasure. Legal professional, I want to what my rights are in my personal domestic. I define the complete state of affairs, the work agenda, the threats to evict me from my belongings, the economic exploitation, survival without my consent. I spoke for 20 minutes without preventing, as though I have been a dam that had finally damaged. David listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes and nodding with expressions that ranged from surprise to indignation. When I completed, he leaned lower back in his chair and looked at me with an aggregate of compassion and professional dedication. Mrs. Everett, what you are describing constitutes economic and emotional abuse, he stated with a clarity that hit me like a lightning bolt. Your daughter and son in regulation are committing what is legally referred to as elder exploitation. But they have got rights for having lived within the residence for 2 years. I asked, remembering threats about consulting an attorney. In a few instances, after a sure length, occupants can claim rights, he explained. But the one's rights never consist of the right to exploit the owner or to impose unpaid work situations on them. And they honestly do now not encompass the right to bring extra visitors without the proprietor's consent. I felt as if a large weight were lifted from my shoulders. For the primary time in months, someone changed into confirming that my belief of fact turned into correct, that I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful. What am I able to do? I requested, even though for the primary time in a long term, the question got here with wish rather than desperation. Numerous matters, he responded, consulting his notes. First, you could notify them in writing which you are terminating any casual housing settlement you had. 2D, you may set up clean limits on the usage of your property and your economic sources. Third, you can request that unauthorized guests vacate the property immediately. And what if they do not want? I requested, thinking about my own family's reactions when they received the one's notifications. Then we've numerous felony alternatives, consisting of eviction orders and reviews of elder abuse. However, my revel-in tells me that after households comprehend that the aged person is legally recommended and knows their rights, they usually rethink their conduct in no time. David defined that he could draft a criminal letter that same day, setting new phrases for anybody who desired to retain dwelling in my residence. Phrases that protected paying market rate hire, contributing equally to household fees, and absolute admire for my authority as the owner. How a lot does this kind of consultation value? I requested, fearing it'd be more money than I may want to have enough money. For elder abuse instances, we've got unique charges, he stated with a reassuring smile. $100 for the preliminary session and $200 for drafting the necessary prison notifications. If the case turns into complicated and we need to visit court, we can speak a price plan. $300. What I spent in 2 weeks keeping my own family, what I had spent in a single night in their romantic retreat. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like money very well spent. Attorney Miller, I want you to draft those letters these days, I said, taking the money from my pockets with arms that not trembled. Super decision, Mrs. Everett. Those letters could be prepared this afternoon. Do you need me to supply them for my part? For your circle of relatives, or do you choose to do it yourself? Myself, I answered without hesitation. I think it is time I had been sincere with my own family. When I left the attorney's workplace, I felt like a very exclusive man or woman. It wasn't that I had all at once regained all my self-assurance, but for the primary time in months I had a plan. I had professional assist. I had prison rights that no one may want to take away with threats or emotional manipulation. But earlier than returning home, I had one greater stop to make. I went to the financial institution and spoke with the supervisor about converting the get entry to codes to my accounts and putting strict limits on who ought to make transactions on my behalf. Have you had issues with unauthorized get admission to in your accounts? The supervisor requested me, and green girl who regarded to without delay recognized the situation. Allow simply say I need to make certain best I will manage my money any further, I answered. Very sensible, she advised me while processing the adjustments. Do you furthermore may need to study who has authorization to use your credit cards? Extraordinary query. With the use of my credit scorecard for months for emergencies that had been never reimbursed. It became time for those emergencies to come to be different people's duty. I need to cancel all extra authorizations, I stated firmly. Best I'm able to have get right of entry to my accounts and cards. When I finally lower back home, it turned into almost 11:00 inside the morning. 4 hours had exceeded due to the fact I had supposedly left to shop for breakfast, and I was returning empty-handed, however, with something a great deal more treasured, an action plan, and the prison assist needed to execute it. Had already gone to work, however, and have been in the dwelling room, definitely annoyed by using my put-off. The youngsters had been at faculty, which intended we'd have privacy for the communication I was about to have. In the end, exclaimed upon seeing me enter. In which have you ever been? It's almost 11:00, and I haven't had whatever to consume. And where's the meals? Asked, noticing I wasn't wearing any grocery baggage. We want to speak, I said, keeping my voice calm but company. All three of us right now. Something in my tone must have alerted them because both fell silent, looking at me with an aggregate of marvel and warning they hadn't proven in a long term. Sit down, I said, pointing to the sofa. This verbal exchange goes to exchange a lot of things on this residence. I have been at a legal professional's office, I commenced, looking there. Expressions pass from inflammation to alarm in a count of seconds. And I've learned some very exciting things about my rights as the proprietor of this residence. The silence that observed became deafening. Looked at me with that expression she wore whilst she became a toddler and became stuck doing something she knew was wrong. For her part, seemed clearly stressed, as if she could not recognize why a housekeeper might be consulting attorneys. Mother, what are you doing? Requested with a voice that attempted to sound involved, however couldn't cover the panic. Why did you visit see a attorney without telling us whatever? Due to the fact I desired to understand exactly what my prison state of affairs is in my very own domestic, I answered, maintaining my voice serene. And it turns out it's very distinctive from what you have led me to believe. I took out the files David had organized in record time, 3 letters with professional letterhead addressed respectively to, and the load of the paper in my hands felt like the weight of my very own dignity being restored. Those are criminal notifications, I persevered, putting the files on the espresso table. You could study them now, or you may anticipate me to formally deliver them to you this afternoon, but the content material is the same. Without delay, stood up and took her letter, analyzing it with a speed that discovered her desperation to recognize how critical the scenario was. Took hers with trembling arms while I watched her expression of superiority steadily transform into shock. That is ridiculous, exclaimed after slightly analyzing the first page. You can't kick us out of the house. We're your own family. I am not kicking you out, I responded with a peaceful that surprised me. I am imparting you the opportunity to stay below new situations, honest and criminal conditions. This letter virtually said the new regulations. If she desired to keep living in my house, she should pay $800 a month in hire, make a contribution half of all household prices, and respect my authority as the owner and my right to privacy in my very own room. $800. She shouted, waving the paper as though it had been a merciless comic story. Mother, you recognize we don't have that form of cash. Then perhaps it is time you searched for a real activity, I replied, using the equal condescending tone she had perfected for talking to me. Or perhaps it is time you determined an area you could come up with the money for along with your personal earnings. Had finished studying her letter and was looking at me as if I had absolutely lost my thoughts. Her notification becomes simpler. She had 48 hours to vacate the belongings, as her presence had no longer been authorized by means of the proprietor. You cannot do that, she stammered, her voice breaking with indignation. I am a vintage lady. You cannot kick me out on the roads like a criminal. I am no longer kicking you out on the road, I replied firmly. I am asking you to return to your private home or to discover lodging in an area wherein you're a welcome visitor, no longer an imposed burden. Might not allow this, she threatened, getting up from the sofa with extra electricity than she had proven considering the fact that her arrival. He's going to defend his mom. He can shield his mother in your house, I said, pointing toward the door. That is my house, and my regulations are reputable here. Had remained silent, studying and rereading the letter as if she expected the phrases to magically change. While she subsequently looked up, there had been tears in Her eyes, but not the kind of true sadness. They were the calculated tears she had used considering the fact that adolescence to control situations in her desire. "Mother, how will you do that to us?" She whimpered with a voice that attempted to sound devastated. "We love you. We just wanted us to be a united family, and this is the way you pay us returned. You threaten us with lawyers. A united family doesn't work with work schedules for one among its individuals," I replied, standing company in opposition to her performance. "A united-owned family does not threaten its members with kicking them out of their own home in the event that they don't agree to be loose home workers. We by no means threaten to kick you out," she protested, though both of us knew that was precisely what they'd done. "I have the listing you gave me," I said, taking the crumpled agenda from my purse. "On the end, it certainly says that if I don't trust those situations, you remember that I prefer to find any other vicinity to live." "What do you call that?" She becomes speechless for a moment, looking for some way to reinterpret her very own written phrases. Finally, she opted to trade method. "Okay, perhaps we have been too strict with the timetable," she admitted, adopting a tone. "We are able to exchange that. We may be great or bendy. You do not need to carry lawyers to clear up own family troubles. The hassle isn't just the schedule," I stated, feeling more potent with every phrase. "The hassle is which you have grew to become me, into your unpaid housekeeper. The problem is that you spend my pension as if it have been yours. The hassle is which you invite human beings into my house without my permission and count on me to take care of them." Who have been listening to our discussion with growing agitation, finally exploded. "That is crazy. Instructed me he lived with a loving own family. He failed to tell me he would live with a crazy antique girl who thinks her residence is a inn." "Precisely," I responded, looking without delay into her eyes. "This is not a resort. It's for my house. And in my house, guests are invited, not imposed. However, I am's mother," she shouted, as though that gave her computerized rights over my belongings. "And I'm the owner of this house," I retorted with a firmness I did not know I possessed. "Your own family dadding with does now not provide you with rights over my home." We're silently calculating, likely doing math on how lots it'd really cost them to stay independently. While she spoke again, her voice had a determined tone I had by no means heard from her. "Mother, let's be realistic," she said, looking to sound rational. "We cannot pay $800 in lease plus household costs. You know that. And also you cannot stay on my own at your age both. We need every other." "I have lived on my own before," I spoke back. "I lived by myself for 10 years after your father died, earlier than you arrived. And I lived thoroughly, thank you very a great deal. But now you're older," she insisted, playing the age card as a final hotel. "What are you going to do in case you get ill? What are you going to do in case you want assist?" "I will rent expert help if I need it," I said. An concept that had just came about to me, but sounded flawlessly practical. There are many offerings for seniors that charge for his or her services and provide them with appreciate and professionalism. Are you going to pay strangers rather than accepting assist from your family? She asked as though the idea have been for my part offensive. I am going to pay for professional services in preference to being exploited by individuals who take advantage of my love for them, I corrected. There may be a totally crucial distinction. At that moment the phone rang. It became, likely calling to check that his mother have been well attended to throughout his absence. Ran to reply, speaking in urgent whispers that communicated that a circle of relatives' crisis changed into unfolding. At the same time as she spoke, approached me with an expression that had modified from indignation to something akin to appreciate. It turned into the primary time she had checked out me as if I were a real individual, instead of a speaking piece of furniture. Honey, she said, with a significantly softer voice. Maybe we are able to reach some arrangement. I don't need to stay within the master bedroom. Am I able to sleep at the couch? Oh, I interrupted her lightly. The problem is not wherein you sleep. The hassle is that you got here to my house without my invitation, anticipating to be handled like an venerated visitor indefinitely. It truly is not truthful to either of us. Arrived home 20 minutes after his name with an expression I had never seen earlier than. It wasn't his typical condescending arrogance. It becomes something a whole lot more risky. It turned into the face of a man who found out that his parasitic world became approximately to collapse. Honey, we want to talk, he stated with a controlled voice that did not idiot me at all. Advised me approximately those ridiculous letters you added from a few charlatan legal professional. Attorney David Miller isn't always a charlatan, I spoke back flippantly. He's a lawyer that specializes in landlord-tenant rights and elder safety. And those letters are not ridiculous. They're flawlessly valid prison notifications. That is a betrayal, he exploded, dropping all pretense of diplomacy. After everything we've got carried out for you, after keeping you agency so you wouldn't be by myself, after turning this empty house right into a home full of life, the distortion of reality turned into so severe that it almost made me snigger. According to their version of events, they have been doing me a want by way of coming to live higher in my residence, eating my food, the usage of my services, and spending my money. You are 42 years vintage, I said with a patience that was hard to hold. If you want to stay in a residence complete of life, you could purchase your very own house and fill it with all of the lifestyles you need. However, no longer at my rate. We've been saving to shop for our house, he shouted as though that justified 2 years of exploitation. But it is impossible to shop whilst there are such a lot of expenses. You don't recognize how high-priced it's far to elevate 2 youngsters. You're right, I admitted, unexpected him with my settlement. I don't apprehend how high-priced it is to raise kids because once I paid all her expenses with my very own cash. I did not look for an older individual to help me. Who were gazing the discussion from the couch, decided to intervene along with her model of maternal assist. Honey, I understand you're burdened, however is a good father and a good son. He would not deserve to be dealt with this way by means of a female your age who is truly dropping her thoughts. Dropping my thoughts? I repeated, feeling fury ignite in my chest. For defending your rights in your house, for threatening your own family with lawyers as opposed to fixing issues like civilized adults, answered with that ethical superiority she had perfected over time. Civilized adults don't impose work schedules on circle of relatives participants. I countered. Civilized adults don't threaten to evict the proprietor of their own residence. Have been packing to and fro inside the dwelling room, simply calculating his alternatives. When he stopped, he had that expression he wore. When he changed into about to play his most powerful card. "'Kay, honey,' he stated with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "If you need to play with legal professionals, we will play with legal professionals because it turns out we've also been consulting about our rights." "What rights?" I requested, although I already suspected in which he turned into going. "The rights of tenants who have lived on our assets for more than 2 years," he replied triumphantly. "The rights of parents who have been elevating their youngsters in a solid domestic. The rights of a circle of relatives that has been retaining a belongings that became deteriorating from loss of care." It was precisely the danger David had warned me they could try and use. The difference became that now I was prepared to stand it. I said with a peaceful that in reality unnerved him. "I suggest you show the one's legal consultations in your real attorney, due to the fact mine confident me that no court in the U.S. might furnish tenant rights to those who have not paid rent and who've been financially exploiting the proprietor. His expression changed immediately. It became apparent that his criminal consultations were net searches or conversations with friends, no longer actual expert recommendation. Besides, I persisted, pulling out my own ace within the hole. My attorney informed me that what you have been doing is called elder exploitation and that it's miles a federal crime. So, if you want to contain greater attorneys in this situation, go beforehand. But I warn you that the legal effects for you will be plenty more critical than for me. The silence that followed became absolute. Even the kids who had arrived from school at some stage in our dialogue and were listening from the hallway remained completely nevertheless. You are threatening to sue us? Asked with a small voice she hadn't used considering that she was a teen. I'm now not threatening you with something, I responded. I am explaining the prison effects of your movements. The equal effects my lawyer defined to me this morning. Appeared on the reciting room entrance with his faculty backpack still on his shoulders and a stressed expression. Why is every person yelling and why is Grandma crying? Indeed had started crying, but they weren't tears of disappointment. They had been tears of rage and humiliation from someone who found out she had completely misplaced control of a state of affairs she thought she had mastered. It's okay, my love, I instructed, approaching to hug him. The adults are having an crucial about how we are going to live on this residence. Are we leaving the house? Asked who had seemed in the back of her brother with huge eyes. My granddaughter's innocent question broke my heart. However, it also reminded me why I used to be doing all this. These youngsters deserve to grow up in an environment wherein family relationships have been based on love and mutual respect, now not exploitation and manipulation. That relies upon for your mother and father, I replied absolutely. In the event that they decide they need to live right here, respecting the house guidelines and contributing pretty, they are able to stay. If not, they must find another location to stay. What policies? Asked with that direct curiosity kids have. Guidelines like any adults dwelling right here must work and make contributions to prices, I defined. Rules like no one can pressure other family participants to paintings without relaxation. Regulations like all of us deserve to be dealt with respect. Checked out me with an expression that were intimidating a week in the past, but now appeared genuinely pathetic. Honey, are you complicated the youngsters with those person dramas? The children had been already burdened. I countered. They had been stressed seeing their grandma being dealt with like a housekeeper. They were careworn hearing their dad and mom talk about kicking their grandma out of her personal house. Now at the least they are listening to that there may be any other manner to live as a own family. Approached her kids and hugged them in a gesture that might were tender if it hadn't been clearly calculated to generate pity. Kids, go to your room and do your homework. The adults want to finish speaking. While the youngsters left, the environment in the reciting room became even more hectic. It became as though we have been all awaiting someone to make the next circulate in a chess recreation wherein the guidelines had absolutely modified. Okay, sooner or later stated, adopting a negotiating tone. Let's consider you are critical approximately all this. Let's consider you really want us to pay rent and make contributions to costs. How plenty time do you provide us to get prepared? The letters specify 30 days. I answered. Consulting the documents. 30 days to decide if you accept the new conditions and begin complying with them, or 30 days to discover some other region to stay. And my mother, he asked, pointing to, who changed into nevertheless sobbing at the couch. Your mom has 48 hours, I stated firmly. She has no housing agreement with me, authorized or unauthorized. Her presence here changed into an imposition, not an invitation. You can't kick an antique girl out with 2 days observe, protested. I can and I can, I responded sudden. Myself with my own willpower. Your mom has her own domestic. If she doesn't need to stay on my own, she can find the right location for people her age, or she can stay with loved ones who honestly invited her. 3 months later, I awakened in my own bed in my very own room at 7 within the morning due to the fact I wanted to, now not because a timetable demanded it. The silence of the residence did not trouble me. In fact, it became the maximum stunning sound I had heard in years. The sound of peace had left on the second day, exactly as the criminal word had detailed. She left amidst dramatic tears and threats of in no way to me once more, as if that were a loss and not a blessing. Had to borrow money from his siblings to pay for a hotel whilst she determined what to do with her lifestyles. Ultimately, she selected to move right into a senior residing condo wherein, I later heard, she continuously complained that the personnel wasn't as efficient as I have been, and had attempted all varieties of techniques throughout those first 30 days. First came total denial. They insisted that everything was a misunderstanding, that they may clear up matters as a circle of relatives without attorneys involved. When that didn't paintings, they attempted emotional guilt. They continuously jogged my memory that I used to be missing the opportunity to see my grow up, as though seeing them grow up required me to be their unpaid 24-hour babysitter. Then came anger. Yelled for 2 hours one night, calling me selfish, merciless, a terrible mom, and a fair worse grandma. Cried, begged me, hugged me, or even brought the youngsters to ask me to change my thoughts. However, for the primary time in years, I stood firm. David had organized me for every of these techniques, and I had calm, felony answers for all their overflowing emotions. The youngsters are going to go through because of you, had instructed me at some point of one in every of her final attempts at manipulation. The children are going to examine that wholesome circle of relatives' relationships are primarily based on mutual respect, now not exploitation. I had spoke back the use of the precise words David had counseled. The very last phase have been the maximum. Revealing. Over the last week earlier than they left, both and had began treating me with an exaggerated courtesy that become nearly extra insulting than their preceding abuses. All of a sudden I was Mrs. Everett and please and thanks very plenty for the whole lot. It become as if they'd unexpectedly remembered that appropriate manners existed, however after they needed them for something. Mom, we hope you understand that we continually loved you. Had informed me the morning they left. It's just that now and again families have misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. 2 years of systematic exploitation reduced to a simple false impression. As though it had been a confusion approximately who need to take out the trash and now not a planned campaign to show me into their loose housekeeper. But they have been gone. They moved into a bedroom condominium on the other aspect of city, an area that price exactly $800 a month in higher plus expenses. Apparently, when it got here to paying and strange landlord, they did have the money. Simplest when it came to paying me their family, was their cash no longer sufficient. The primary few days after their departure have been ordinary. The house felt especially empty after 2 years of being filled with steady noise, urgent needs, and the perpetual strain of serving other humans. However, gradually, that feeling of vacancy had converted into something absolutely specific. Freedom. I could have breakfast once I wanted. I ought to watch the television shows I appreciated. I could determine what to cook dinner based on my own cravings, no longer on the nutritional needs of 4 distinct humans. I may want to spend my pension by my self-desires and even treat myself to small luxuries I had forgotten existed. The first time I bought sparkling flora for my dining room desk, I started out crying proper there inside the supermarket. They had been $15 that would have previously long passed to special cereals or hypoallergenic shampoo for uninvited guests. Now they had been $15 I may want to spend on something that made me glad for the simple pleasure of creating myself happy. Lucy have been a blessing during the whole technique. Now not best had she helped me maintain my clear up in the course of the maximum difficult moments, but she had end up a true buddy. Now we had lunch collectively 2 times per week, went to the farmer's marketplace on Saturday mornings, and had commenced taking portrait classes on the network middle. Do not you omit the noise of the kids. She had requested me one afternoon while we painted watercolor landscapes. I had replied clearly. However, I do not miss being their unpaid babysitter. There's a totally huge distinction. And it was authentic. And visited me each different Saturday, an association we had established after many hectic negotiations. Before everything, had attempted to apply the visits as a shape of strain, suggesting that if I failed to supply in on some factor of the separation agreement, the visits may want to turn out to be extra complex to coordinate. David had cautioned me to preserve all communications about visits in writing, and through him until realized she couldn't use her own children as emotional blackmail weapons. Sooner or later, we had reached a civilized settlement. The youngsters came every other Saturday from 10:00 inside the morning to 6:00 within the night time, and that I took them to do a laugh activities I should come up with the money for now that I wasn't subsidizing the lifestyle of 4 adults. The difference in my dadding with and became excellent. When I wasn't liable for them 24 hours a day, once I did not have to worry approximately their meal instances. Their area and their steady leisure, I may want to certainly be their grandma. I may want to smash them a bit, chortle with them, listen to their faculty testimonies without being distracted considering what household chore I had to do subsequent. Grandma, why do not you stay with us anymore? Had requested me for the duration of one of her first visits. Because adults want their own spaces to be glad, I had defined. Your mom and dad want their very own home in which they could make their own selections, and I want my very own home where I'm able to make mine. But you still love us, she had insisted with that authentic difficulty that broke my heart. I like you greater than something in the international, I had assured her, hugging her tightly. And precisely because I like you so much, I want you to examine that individuals who love every different treat each different with recognize and affection. They don't take gain of each different. Who was older and greater observant, had understood the situation notably maturely. Moms and dads made. You work plenty, did not they, Grandma? Yes, my love, I had admitted. However, now we're all learning higher ways to be a own family. That morning, 3 months after the huge alternate, I woke up with a feeling I had absolutely forgot. High-quality expectation, not tension about what needs would wait for me at some stage in the day, but genuine interest about what suitable things I could pick to do. David had referred to as me the previous week to inform me that, and had formally withdrawn any prison claims to my property. Reputedly, their consultations with actual legal professionals had confirmed what I already knew. They had no prison rights over my house, and any try to set up such rights might best result in expenses of elder exploitation. How does freedom experience, Mrs. Everett? David had requested me with that warm smile I had come to appreciate so much. It looks like waking up from a totally long nightmare, I had answered. It looks like remembering that I am a person, not an item. That morning, I were given up once I wanted. Had breakfast what I desired, and dressed to visit my new preferred activity, senior dance training I had discovered on the community center. At 66, I was studying to salsa. I had made new friends and was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten existed. As I organized to leave, I looked at my reflection within the lavatory replicate. The lady who appeared back at me not had that forever tired and irritating expression she had worn for the beyond 2 years. Her eyes had been brilliant, her again straight, and she or he had something she had lost without figuring out it. She had dignity. As I left the house, I locked the door and walked to the bus with firm steps. It turned into my house, my lifestyles, my choice. And for the primary time in a completely long term, the one's phrases failed to scare me. They filled me with pride due to the fact I had learned the most essential lesson of my life. It is in no way too late to reclaim your self-admire. And when you reclaim it, nobody can take it far from you again. No matter how a good deal you love them or how a whole lot they love you, true love, I had found in no way calls for you to sacrifice your dignity. And genuine own family by no means asks you to come to be less than yours so that they may be extra. In case you loved my tale, you could help me through sending a outstanding thanks so I will write extra stories like this. Thank you a lot in advance. What approximately you? What could you do on this character's shoes? I'd sincerely love to listen your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I am usually curious to what you suspect. Oh, and let me recognize wherein you have heard this tale. If you need to pay attention greater existence stories like this, like the video and join my channel. There are numerous greater waiting for you. Huge hugs.